Hello and welcome to the latest of our low carbon conversations. My name is Joe Croft, Head of Sustainability, and we're joined today by another wonderful expert. We've got Marylis Ramos, Director at Savills Earth, who's in charge of all things ESG and lots of carbon stuff. So we're going to talk about lots of low carbon stuff today. Thank you ever so much for coming. Really
Thanks for
great to have
having
you. Yeah, well, you say that now. Give us another 45 minutes. We'll see what you're saying. So, lots to talk about. What I'd like to kick off with is where you think we are as a market at the moment, where you think the maturity is, where we'll get into where we're going, but let's just start with where we are at present.
I think it's a very interesting time. It's changed a lot in the last 2 years. I would have said 2 years ago that we were nowhere near where we needed to be, but I think the pace of change in the past 2 years has been so fast, and awareness is growing. We're not there yet. There's still a lot of patches in the market and the industry that need to upskill and get there. But I think the sentiment, the drive, the recognition that we need to do something about this climate emergency, that we need to change our practices, is growing. So I'm hopeful that I still feel that we're not moving as fast as we should be, but I'm hopeful that we're going in the right direction.
Relentless hopefulness. When you say patches, so I'm interested in that. So which are the bits of the industry where you feel like people are pushing and where are the bits that are dragging?
I think it hasn't changed. There's a lot of knowledgeable people out there, consultants that I've been around for almost 20 years doing sustainability consultancy. I've seen the evolution, and I know there are good people out there who really know their stuff. But now we have clients who are more enlightened, and I think that's great. Every person around the table delivering designs and working on existing buildings probably has a growing awareness of ESG. Now, in terms of the gaps, I think there is still a lot of upskilling to do. Like, people don't know what the right terminology is. People don't know what the difference is between something that is truly sustainable or something that's just greenwash. And I think we need to work on that as an industry. People like talking about sustainability because they think they have to, because there's value in it, or because investors, they know they are accountable to people who expect them to deliver. But a lot of them have this lack of knowledge, really, about it. And I think what's great about this time is that I am seeing clients who know that they don't have that knowledge and who are going out to find it. We're seeing roles like, in my team, we have a role called the Sustainability Champion, which is a role that never used to exist before. Because clients were like, I'm already paying my whole team to do a various raft of things. But now they're asking us to do, can you just be the holding hand for that entire team and make sure that these goals that we've set are going to be achieved throughout every stage of the process? And I think that's great, because that extra investment in that added blanket of security says a lot about this commitment to ESG and sustainability that we're seeing.
And that, you think that role works? We've got some projects where it's working really well, and then we've got other projects where sometimes I think creating that role then lets some of the other consultants off the hook, because the sustainability champion's dealing with that, and actually it needs everyone to. We've definitely seen it work really well, and then not in others. But overall, you think that's been a positive step?
I think it's a positive step. I think it's the way the role is structured as well. So I think it's effective when the sustainability champion is acting on behalf of the client, looking after the client's interests, looking after making sure that their goals are met, but also monitoring progress. So really, in a way, it's a kind of a friendly critic to the design team. So they have to be strong enough to say, hang on, you're not quite getting there. We need to push you a little bit further. But also being able to measure stuff and know whether the numbers they're getting are good enough, and know whether the numbers they're getting from consultants are being measured in the right way. So I think that data-driven decision-making is something that the Sustainability Champion can definitely facilitate.
And so you got the Sustainability Champion. Everyone buys into it tomorrow. There aren't enough of them, right? There's not enough Sustainability Champions. There's some really good ones, but there's not enough people. How do we, as an industry, go from where we are in terms of the available knowledge base to the knowledge base that we need?
Well, I think it's also going away from that how we used to do things, where you had a sustainability consultant in the room, and they're like, okay, I don't have to worry about sustainability anymore. This person is just going to do everything, and run with it. I think at the moment we really have to recognize that every member of a design team should know about sustainability, should know how within their little patch they can help achieve those goals, and everyone should be conversant about it. So, in parallel with their having that guardian of sustainability, I think everyone should recognize that they have a responsibility to upskill themselves and know how to get to net zero carbon, how to make developments that are holistically sustainable, or offices that promote health and well-being. I think it's the big picture, and everyone has a part to play.
Right. In terms of the value of sustainability, you obviously spend a lot of time talking to clients. How are they seeing that value change over the last few years, and how are they seeing it, and how are they quantifying it? I guess I'm interested.
I mean, it's great because I've gone from a period of being a consultant in the room, having to justify the business case for green buildings, for sustainability, and finding it a really hard job to do, to now actually building value being driven by how sustainable it is. So ever since we started thinking about ESG, so the governance structure, the financial instruments, and how investments are looking at sustainability through that lens, it's really changed the dialogue around why we should build green buildings. And I think there is value now, there's value emerging in certification. So having a building badge that's BREEAM or LEED or well certified has a certain premium in the market, and that's being seen in a lot of research that's coming out of the likes of Savills and JLL. And so there is definitely a premium now because companies who have their own net zero commitments are looking at buildings that will help them achieve those. So the property industry has a real tangible role to play.
Yeah, most of my career has been spent on these building certifications, which are great, and I don't want to critique them, but it's been really refreshing the last couple of years, having the orientation, the emphasis changing slightly to not move away from them entirely, but it's no longer just a certification. Right? There's a much more focus on carbon than perhaps previously. And in terms of those clients, then, so when you talk about clients, you're talking about the occupier side or the landlords, or you think both sides of that?
I mean, the occupiers are driving a lot of it, certainly, because they're the ones who have these corporate commitments. So occupiers generally don't own real estate, or sometimes they do, but they have probably science-based targets to lean to, or renewable energy targets. But the science-based targets means that they do have to look at their premises and make sure that energy efficiency is being thought of, net zero carbon is being thought of, added to the fact that we're in an energy crisis. And then for some businesses, that the cost of that is quite significant. And if they don't look at it, it's a very, it's a financial piece that really needs to be looked at.
And then on the occupier side, obviously, if the occupier is thinking about science-based targets and Scope 2 emissions, there's a big emphasis on them to bring down their operational carbon. How do you? I mean, I worry sometimes that we're creating an incentive structure there where they're going to want to go into brand new, shiny, efficient buildings that are going to reduce their Scope 2 emissions, and they're not going to worry about the Scope 3 emissions of building that building in the first place. Are you seeing any? Where's the kind of the client maturity on ownership of some of the embodied carbon around these new builds, or do you think?
Well, I'm not going to lie. It is quite tricky, that issue of how do you sell the idea of a low embodied carbon building to an occupier when their metrics are all based on operational things.
Yeah.
I mean, I know occupiers are thinking about circular economy, but that's more to do with the refurb and that aspect of it. So they would be attracted by stories like, oh, this building has been the offering here is that the buildings are low maintenance, that they're durable, they have longevity and everything. But that doesn't address the bricks and mortar, so what the building is built out of. And we all know, as an industry, that reuse is less embodied carbon than a new build.
Sure.
But in terms of their metrics, they're not really seeing that. And I'm sure all of them would like to do the right thing. But we need to get better at incentivizing that, at developing those drivers, at looking at the whole life cycle of carbon as opposed to just the bit that they're kind of experiencing.
So I agree. Bit of a tricky question, but how? How do we do that? How do we incentivize occupiers to take ownership of the whole value chain of that carbon rather
Well, I
than just the
think
scope 2?
whole life carbon needs to be a metric that investors or that they work into their governance structure. So if they commit to that, and I don't know, it's a tricky one because it doesn't exist at the moment. We know we have ways of measuring it, but the way scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are scoped at the moment is that that particular piece of carbon doesn't really get considered as much as it should be.
Yeah.
There is a kind of a growing stigma around new build that we're seeing in the industry. There's a whole movement towards planning authorities and councils pushing for the retrofit, which I think is a great thing and the right way to go. Obviously, it's not the only solution, but I think thinking of retrofit first before going straight to new build as an option is definitely something we should be doing. But the people who are in charge of that decision also need the assurance that the people occupying their building will value that decision. And that, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
But that last point is critical, right? They need to feel assured that they'll value that decision. So the danger is if one developer makes that choice at the moment, that decision won't be valued because it'll be compared to the 5 new buildings up the road. But if there's something done at a regulatory government, there's various ways you can do it, but the industry needs to do it as a whole to make it a fair playing field. Otherwise, one developer does a good.
You do get value. You do get the value from the certification schemes, like the BREEAMs and the LEEDs have points for reducing embodied carbon, and it's part of the big picture. So in a way, reducing embodied carbon will also give you points there, and therefore get you the certification badge that you need, which will then drive premiums on your buildings. But I think there needs to be more. Yeah.
I mean, those schemes are really good at lots of things, but embodied carbon is not one of them, right?
It's one of many.
It's too small an aspect for me, given the emergency of the carbon situation.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that incentive structure is really important. What do you think the other key barriers are to making the commercial property sector lower carbon? What are the We'll start with the barriers, not the solutions. Just what are the things that are stopping us doing this this afternoon? I'm free at 4, actually.
In terms of barriers, there's kind of, obviously we touched on this earlier, which is the lack of knowledge, the upskilling required to get there. I think in terms of the decision-making process, there is still a lot of kind of greenwashing going on. It's focusing on tick boxes as opposed to keeping an eye on what we're really trying to do. So we are really trying to hit that 2-degree, 1.5-degree scenario. So if you think about it in those terms, you will want to make decisions that actually make tangible steps towards that. But at the moment, because we have all of these compliance things, we have the certification methods, there is a risk that you're just doing it for that and not really for the proper goal. So I think we all need to get an awareness of where that integrity comes from, what it really means.
Yeah. The industry is, it feels like lots of people want to do something, but there isn't a thing to grab hold of outside of whole life carbon set, and even within that, there's so much grey area around how that methodology's done. But we were talking before about net zero carbon pathways and some of the work you guys are doing at Savills Earth. Do you want to tell us a bit about what you guys have been doing on that front?
The work that we've been doing around net zero pathways has been really fascinating, because one of the things that has come out of this focus on hitting that 1.5 degree or 2 degree scenario is the idea that buildings could get stranded if they don't perform to a certain standard at a certain point in time.
Yeah.
So it's these curves that mean that your building has to progressively reduce its energy usage over time. Otherwise, there will come a point where an occupier is going to want to let it, or a developer or investor is going to want to buy it. and they're going to be like, oh, it's not quite there, and it doesn't meet our energy performance requirements. So yeah, I think the key thing about net zero pathways is the idea of de-risking your asset, so that it is still relevant in 5 years, it's still relevant in 10 years, it still has value, and it doesn't get stranded.
So on that point, Marylis, you're doing these net zero pathways. There must be some times when you're doing it and you're thinking this investment is huge and this building is just going to struggle to get to where it needs to. How do you guys go about defining that line for when new build is appropriate versus a refurb?
I think the net zero pathway is one way of looking at it, and sometimes even we have clients who come to us to do net zero pathways on buildings they don't even own yet, because it's factored into the value of the building. But I think the question of whether to go for a retrofit and new build is a bigger one than the carbon one. I think it's not just the carbon you have to look at. I think the times when we've kind of looked at a building with a client and thought that this would be a better for a new build as opposed to a retrofit project is things where the design itself, like the basic form of the building, doesn't really lend itself to modern ways of working, or there's something in it that leads to an unhealthy working environment, or the market just doesn't have any desire for that type of space. So it is a holistic issue, not just a carbon one. And also sometimes we had a project recently where, you know how when you retrofit something, you would probably want to add more space to create more floor space for the building. And usually when you do that on a tight urban site, you add stories on top. What might happen is you have a building that can't support that, and you have to spend quite a lot of steel or material to reinforce the structure of the building, and you end up going over your embodied carbon budget even more than normal. So it all needs to be kind of thought through very well. I think you do need to consider all of these things, and that's where kind of we come in to help. And it's what's nice about Savills Earth is that we are linked in with our engineering and design consultancies. We have our building and property consultancies. So what the engineers give us is that very early awareness of any issues that might arise, and they come to it from experience of delivering this stuff. And the building and property consultancy have the experience of actually making it happen. So it's not just a technical consultant doing a desktop study and saying this is your ideal pathway, and then having it actually not really be feasible on site because it's not viable to do it in that order, or it doesn't make sense to do it in that order. It's just that sense check from a really multidisciplinary approach that is needed.
So, I mean, I've seen a few of these reports. We're working on some projects. We've got some recommendations around architectural situations on the perimeter, and then there's usually a bunch of services issues. They're two pretty separate disciplines traditionally. Mm-hmm. And how do you go about, in terms of certainly any services, you're going to get a nice operational benefit with this new services piece, but there's an embodied carbon cost there. And in my experience, we've got some good services knowledge that can do operational carbon well, and we've got some good embodied carbon. There's very little crossover between these two gangs of people. How do you go about thinking about the embodied carbon when you're looking at the operational carbon benefits of a services upgrade, for example?
So what we've had to do in the sustainability champion role is actually pick bits of information from a lot of different people and bring them together, because no one really does that. So the services engineers now that we've been working with actually have a very good idea of what the embodied carbon of their kit is, but that's where the line is drawn. And then you need someone to link that up with the people doing the structures who have a very good idea of what the embodied carbon of the structure is. Yeah. And then you have the facade engineer, possibly, if you have one on board, who then have the embodied carbon of their parts. So I think the industry is upskilling for their particular patch to understand the embodied carbon of that, but we still need someone to kind of bring it all together.
Which is you?
Which is the sustainability champion. Yeah.
Amen. Okay, last question of the day. We finish all our podcasts like this. What one thing would you change about our industry to help drive the low carbon agenda?
Well, my background is...
You can't say collaboration.
No,
That's a
I
cheat.
promise I'm not going
Yeah,
to say
okay,
collaboration.
good.
I've said that a lot of times already today. But well, I'm a sustainability consultant, but I also am a researcher. So as a researcher, I love data. So the one thing we can change is get better at gathering that data, understanding that data, and actually using it to make decisions. One of the things that frustrates me with the sustainability champion role sometimes is that engineers don't like doing iterative calculations. And that is really what we need at every stage of the design. When the design changes, what is the impact on carbon? What is the impact on structure, on embodied carbon and operational carbon? How is that going to affect daylight? How is that going to? And those calculations often are done at the end because they're quite
Yeah.
expensive to do. So I think just having that quicker tools for making those rapid decisions and really understanding whether a decision is the right way to go based on numbers, not just gut feeling, is something that we need to get better at.
So is that to enable those that iterative is that a tech solution that's required, or is that clients need to pay their consultants more to do multiple iterations during a design?
I think it's both. I think
Okay.
we're just consultants are used to just getting the design freeze. Design freeze, and then we do the calculation on that. We're not going to
Yeah.
do any calculations before that. But you're flying blind, I think, when you're doing that. And I think we can't afford to do that anymore. We really need solutions that make a tangible difference. And for that, we need the information to make those decisions.
Right, that brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much, anyone who's listened. I hope you found that interesting. I certainly did. If you did find that interesting, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Listen to the other podcasts available in the series, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you very much, Marylis. Should we get some lunch?
Yeah,
Thank you
sure.
very much.
You're
Super.
very welcome.